Good morning and welcome to Radio Friends on Wednesday, September the 26th. Our walking encyclopedia is with, you know what I'm talking about, JOAN STACK. This is a lady that I really mean it when I say this as a compliment. You are a walking encyclopedia of history of the state of Missouri.
Well, especially the art. It's been fascinating working at the State Historical Society, all of the ways that the images connect with our history.
Yeah. So what show do you have up right now?
Well, today I'm going to talk about a show that's a little different than some of the other shows you might have seen because it doesn't relate to a specific historical event, but it still relates to Missouri history, Missouri artists. It is a show we're calling The Aesthetic of the Monumental Figure.
The aesthetic of the monumental figure.
Yes. So you're going to see artworks in which the figures are close to life size or larger, and they are all very, very large paintings, and many of them have not been out for many years. We do have one new acquisition on display, and you'll see artwork by some artists you may know. We have a couple of contemporary artists, Bill Hawk or William Hawk, who is a professor at MU in the art department, and also Jane Mudd, who is a professor in Fulton. So those two artists, some people may know, and you'll probably be interested in seeing.
So these paintings that you're talking about are 5 or 6 feet tall.
Oh, yes.
Is that difficult, you think, for the artist to do a painting that is that large?
I think so. I mean, that's why you don't see them that often, because it is, of course, a really it's a heroic process.
It is. And then the detail that has to be put into a massive painting like that takes a lot more time.
Yeah, and to do a figure life size, and your relationship with it is interesting, because here is this figure that is as big as you, and you have a different kind of psychological relationship with these figures, and it's been really interesting to have them in the gallery together. And they create some interesting connections when hung in our gallery next to other monumental figures.
So what kind of experience have you had when you started displaying these and you go up and you stand and you look at a painting that's as large as you are?
Yes. Well, maybe we could show one of them.
Okay.
I have, for those of you on the radio, I've got a picture here of two paintings hung together. They're both of women. They're both life size. One is a late 19th century painting. We don't know the exact date, but from the clothing, you would think it's from the Gilded Age period. It's a woman and she's standing there. Her hand is on a chair. It's a traditional portrait.
And it's the dark clothes. Traditional.
With a little bustle. And this was probably a family portrait, probably from a relatively wealthy family that wanted to commission a portrait of the lady of the house.
So what time period would you think this is?
Well, we think it from the clothing, the Gilded Age period, late 19th. Probably, if it's from the 20th century, it's from right at the beginning, but probably late 19th.
Okay, here's a question I have for you, and maybe you can answer it, maybe you can't. Why are these people never smiling in these pictures? They're never smiling.
Well, I think it's very difficult to paint a smile or to draw a smile if you've ever tried, because people can't hold a smile. So this particular painting, we think the face is actually based on a photograph, and a photomechanical process may have been used to get that face looking very much like a photograph.
It does. And she almost has... Well, she's got that Mona Lisa. Kind of,
well, the eyes will follow you around the room. That's what a lot of these figures do, look out at the viewer, and that also creates that psychological relationship.
And what is it with a painting that the eyes follow you wherever you are?
Well, they just appear to look out at you.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's not that hard for an artist to do it, and it does create that interesting psychological connection. But it's interesting to compare this kind of woman of the house, traditional, the lady who runs, but she's of course a wealthy woman, so she probably has servants doing the cooking and the cleaning and the like. But with this much, much different image that was painted in 1968. And this is a new acquisition. It's by a woman whose husband was in the art department in the 1960s. His name was William Clapp. She was a graduate student and painted this as part of her master's program. It's a self-portrait, but it's a very odd self-portrait.
Yeah, she's standing next to a gas range with the oven door open.
Yeah.
What's the significance of that?
Well, I mean, you can read into it what you like. I mean, I, of course, immediately think about Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, which came out in 1963, in which she was exploring the kind of hidden angst of women who felt forced into the kind of domestic roles, but never fully satisfied, as though their identity was not, they weren't fulfilled as people.
Right.
Now, with the gas range open, I think also of Sylvia Plath, the famous poet who died in 1963 by sticking her head in an oven, perhaps, you know, as a result of this feminine mystique, this sense of being unfulfilled, of not being able to ever reach that kind of feminine mystique that is set up as an ideal, and yet women felt as though they couldn't achieve that, they weren't fulfilled by it.
You need to go down and see the painting in real life.
Yes, oh yes.
Now, we're almost out of time here, Joan, but you've got two more that we want to get on.
Yeah, these two are interesting. One was probably done around the 1960s or 70s by Siegfried Reinhardt, who was a relatively famous artist in St. Louis. He taught at Washington University for years. His murals were in Lampert Airport, so you may be familiar with those. It's a portrait of George O. Carpenter, who was a mogul from the earlier part of the century. He died in the 1940s, but this was done later, a posthumous portrait. Just this giant businessman. It's a very kind of odd picture, but it's very realistic. His name is on the picture. We think it might have been hung in some sort of, perhaps in the public library where...
he looked very stern.
Yeah, Carpenter gave a great deal of money. And then next to it is a much more recent painting, probably from the end of the 20th century, by William Hawke, who is the professor at MU. It is a more surrealistic image, and it's called Wounded. But what's really interesting, they're a similar scale. They're both over life size. And in Wounded, you also have this man with a businessman's jacket, a blue jacket. So he also sort of brings to mind the businessman. But in this case, he is screaming, and he has all of these wounds in his body. And so there's this sense, perhaps, another sort of idea of angst, the angst of the business world.
Right.
And so it's really interesting to see these hung together.
And they will be on display at the State Historical Society until?
These are going to be on display until we move.
Okay,
so
till you move to the new
Monday
location.
and Sunday, but come and see us. It's free to come in and look at the art.
All right. Thank you very much. Joan Stack from the State Historical Society. Always a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you.
Tomorrow, MU Healthcare and Youth Empowerment Zone. Drop me an email, pepperp@missouri.edu. Bye-bye.